Development Committee. We can start with item number 1. We are joined by Councilmember Parks, who is the only other member of this committee while we await an election. And so with item number 1.
Item number 1 is a motion, Han Garcetti Rosenthal, relative to directing the CAO, CLA, and Office of Finance to report in regard to various proposed business tax reforms and related matters.
Please.
Good afternoon, John Wickham with the CLA's office. Before you is a motion, Han Garcetti Rosenthal's line, concerning various proposals related to the gross receipts tax. About 5 years ago, the council adopted a number of business tax reforms, including a small business exemption and the class consolidation of the gross receipts tax, et cetera. And this is a follow-on to that action by going back and looking at some of the gross receipts and following up with additional reforms. So this resolution would have the CAO, CLA, and Office of Finance review these several ideas and send them back to the analysis back to council. Now, items 2 and 3 on your agenda relate to formation of BTAC, reformation of BTAC, and it may be that if you act to reestablish BTAC, you might want to have them take a look at these items as well. So,
These are these items conflicting?
no, there are. I don't see any substantial conflicts among these items. Actually, several of these were in independent motions that were considered by the Jobs Committee back in August as well, and those were forwarded over to the Budget and Finance Committee for consideration as well. They all complement each other in one way or another. They're all getting at making it providing incentives to small businesses in the city, incentives to bring new businesses to the city, to continue the reduction in the tax rates that was implemented 5 years ago. So these are all ideas that are building on actions by the council in the past.
Okay. Is my staff present? Saeed? Specifically, the item number 1 is the Han motion, correct?
Yes, it is.
And that calls for the recreation of the...
The Han motion relates to the gross receipts tax.
She's focused on the gross receipts tax.
Exactly.
The Garcetti motion is to recreate the business advisory tax.
That's item number 3, and item number 2 is a Han motion related to reestablishing BTAC. So you have items 2 and 3.
In the reestablishment of the committees, the first thing I want to deal with is, are they different? Because they read differently, but I think they accomplish the same thing.
I think the bottom line on items 2 and 3 was to reestablish BTAC.
Okay.
And as you remember, that's the committee that...
Right. Mr. Garcetti speaks to oversight by the President's office, by the Chairman of the Budget, and the Chairman of the Jobs Committee. And I'm assuming that in your report you would define that oversight, but I didn't see it conflicting with how the BTAC was established last time, with appointments from each of the council members. It was a little... Okay. My staff and I had a little bit of a conversation about that because some people on my staff felt that the groups that were mentioned in the Garcetti motion were the BTAC, but I wasn't real clear on, there wasn't specific language to say that, and there wasn't specific language to say that the BTAC wasn't going to be formed in the same way it was the first time. Ms. Hahn's motion was to reestablish it the way it was.
Ms. Hahn's motion very specifically outlined reestablish it as it was and outlined appointments by each of the 15 members and the mayor, et cetera. The Garcetti motion simply said reestablish BTAC. The text of the motion above discussed a different oversight option.
Well, I don't know. Unless I saw it as overseeing the BTAC.
Yeah, that would be actually an effective way to handle it, that to reestablish BTAC with the appointments by the 15 members, et cetera, and then have a, kitchen cabinet, so to speak, of individuals who would be overseeing or reviewing that work.
I think I can appreciate Mr. Garcetti's oversight of responsibility, but I want to be clear that I haven't talked to him directly, so I want to be clear that he didn't see that as the BTAC. We have somebody here who can help us with that.
Marcel Porras, Legislative Deputy for Council President Garcetti.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Council Member. Just to provide, I've just started covering this issue, but from what I understand, the Council President would like the BTAC to consist of a smaller group of members, not previously as the 16 members,
Okay.
in order to provide more flexibility.
There was a difference, okay.
So I do think we're looking at recommending a group made up of about 9 members, consisting of appointments from the Mayor's office, from the Council President office, and then also from the heads of certain committees as that would relate to business tax, such as Jobs Committee, Business and Finance.
Okay, now the BTAC committee was appointees of 15 different council offices and the mayor's office, so we had 16 people that were outside representatives. How do we get that kind of input?
Well, I think we would look to each of the committee chairs to help identify entrepreneurs.
So we might ask the oversight group to select 2 or 3 people.
Correct.
Participate.
So
Okay.
it would be 9 members. The committee heads wouldn't exactly sit on the BTAC.
Okay, then what I'd like to do is have us ferret that out. I would like for the CLA to ferret out exactly what the recommendation for Mr. Garcetti is, for obvious reasons, before we move forward. Or is there a way to do that as we move this toward council?
We can move that forward to council if your committee, I understand from the clerk that this was dual referred to both this committee and to the Jobs Committee, so the time between...
This is the Jobs Committee.
and the Budget and Finance Committee, sorry.
But also, I'll take it up twice if you
sorry.
want to.
It's one referral is
That's the
enough.
budget, right?
Yeah, so it is to go to budget as
We
a
have the chair
follow-up.
of budget here, so
Yeah.
we might be able to make a decision right now, so...
Unless, we can, before you want to go to council. Now, my understanding from the Council 13 deputy is that this is an alternative proposal to have 9 appointees by several council chairs, as opposed to the CLA recommendation, which is to have appointees by the 15 council members plus. So these are 2 different models that are being put forward for the committee's consideration.
Okay, but they're not specified, and it makes it very difficult for us to go one way or the other without knowing exactly what we're doing. A Hans motion we know because we did it before. That's
Yes.
the way it was done. But if there's a new proposal to do it, I need to understand what exactly Mr. Garcetti is asking us to do, because I don't want this to go to council with some unclarity, and which actually might cause us demise.
So the question then is, would you like a report back to this committee at your next meeting with the details on the Garcetti proposal? As a follow-up to the CLA report?
Is that what direction you would seek? I mean,
The thing is a little confusing. I was just wondering on both of these motions, whether one's going to 2 committees, one's just going to other committee, and they're dealing with the same issue.
Yeah.
I tried to read on Garcetti's motion. It appeared that when I saw the word oversee, I thought it was much like the prior BTAC that was overseen by Budget and Finance, and was it, I forget what, and I guess it was audits where Wendy was, and then Eric, as the president, kind of oversaw what they produced. But then when he threw in I think in the second paragraph, the task force, that kind of threw me as to, is that something separate? Because throughout it, he keeps saying the BTAC. Well, what we know as BTAC is 15 members. And so it's unclear to me where he was headed. Janice is straightforward saying we should reinvent what we already had.
Exactly.
So it is unclear as to what the BTAC is in his mind versus what the task force is, and what does oversee mean.
Yes.
Well, I tell you what, why don't we just hold this for 1 week or 2 weeks?
Okay.
And ask you to come back with a report that tries to ferret out the difference between the two. Or if there are other options that the authors might want to consider. But going forward, as is, it would pit the two against each other, and I don't think that necessarily has to occur. I certainly don't want that debate on the council floor. I'd rather have it in committee. So why don't we just hold this for 2 weeks? And you get 2 bites of the apple here. You have the chair of both of the committees involved. What's the third committee? What was there another committee?
No, it was just one item 3 went to 2 committees, and the almost identical motion went to 1 committee. So that's what I was just wondering, if
Well,
that was just an oversight.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that and see how those referrals were made.
Okay, I mean, I'm sure Mr. Parks and I agree that we would like to reestablish the function, but
Yeah.
how we
The
do it.
structure is
Yeah.
the question.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you've answered the main policy.
Okay. Now, item number, which are the other items?
Item number 1?
Yeah, item number 1 actually should be referred to the BTAC. Is that not,
Yes.
is that how you would see that?
I think that would make sense. If you reestablish BTAC, then that's a good venue to...
Could you describe
evaluate
item number
these.
1 quickly?
Again, item number 1, that was the motion by Hahn, Garcetti, Rosendahl, and Zine to evaluate
Specific
gross receipts tax.
We may choose others, we may come back. So that's something that
Exactly.
should be explored by the BTAC,
Yeah.
whatever it looks like. So I would actually, is there some way to combine all of these items?
Subject matter is, it's already been done, and subject matter is just enough different between them that they rated different files, since these came in different
At one
motions.
point, I'd like to combine all of these items into one report.
They can combine them into one report, but we'd actually be considering 3 items at once.
That's fine, as long as we have one report.
I think what'll happen is when council acts on each of these agenda items, it'll go to BTAC, and then when BTAC has concluded their work, you will get one item back.
No, I want one report out of this committee for
Okay.
all of these 3 items. Otherwise, it's confusing. If there's another item out there related to BTAC or reforming the
No.
tax system, then we'll throw that in there too, but I want to do it all at once. So the
Here's-
BTAC
several that are
receives
in
everything all at once.
It appears that these 3 are the only 3 to do with BTAC that are.
That's fine.
Items 1, 2, and 3.
That's fine. So items 1, 2, and 3 we'll have one report on items 1, 2, and 3.
So the-
Item number 1, my take is that it should be referred to the BTAC once it's formed. And actually, I think it's preceding their work, and it shouldn't have, I wouldn't have introduced it at this point. I would have waited for BTAC, but that's fine. There'll probably be other proposals that will emerge. So if we could do that, then in 2 weeks, come back with a report on the 3. I'm sorry, if you're not aware, you do have to fill out a public comment card if you want to make a statement. I just want to make sure. Hold on just a second. Okay, then we'll come back and have this discussion in 2 weeks. Okay? Thank you. Great.
Let me ask one thing regarding, and I think with BTAC coming back to life, I think we got to have a base to start from in the fact of, it would, I think, be very, very helpful, because some of the members may not have had a history with it and such, but we should be thinking about what, as a base, we should provide them. I would think that, going back to the 2004, the report that they completed, were the recommendations all implemented? Do we know what the impacts have been? Also, John, you staffed the business task force?
Yes.
Okay, and so that came forward, and we had recommendations. We had the VICA report that was sent, and a motion was made to bring those things forward. I think we need that, and then we had a variety of things on that single-day revenue meeting with the council, and then we had the collection sheriff. But it seems like that would be the base that they would get started from, of giving them this myriad of information, so they're not rehashing, restarting, but they know where we are at that time.
Absolutely.
And, but that would be what I'd like to see, is those kinds of things that they get started with.
And there might be a request also from the former chairs, the past chairs of BTAC, if they are not on the reformulated BTAC, to come and make a presentation on the work that they had done. I think that might be valuable. And then there was one other thing on that, but we can do that. It is important for them to come in and hit the ground running.
Because I think you track most of this stuff, but it would be good, I think, to have a booklet or something that gives them kind of a perspective to know what was recommended, what's been approved,
What worked, what didn't.
what worked, didn't work, what's still hanging out there, so that, we don't end up with some rethread ideas that are already tried, true, or in place, and people can get started with a fresh start.
Exactly. And another thing on this, in a previous action by the Jobs Committee back in August, a motion was approved to seek a study, an economic study, that looks at several of these ideas in the Hahn motion that's before you on item 1.
Yeah,
And
I would like to have all of that into the one report.
exactly.
Would it be possible to have it in 2 weeks?
Yeah, so I'll work with the clerk's office to make sure that all comes together in one piece. And having
We could do it at 2 points. We could do it as part of this committee, or we can send it out with a direction to complete a more thorough report, giving direction to the BTAC should it be approved by the council.
yeah,
So we have time. I mean,
exactly.
next week, in
The next
the
meeting.
2 weeks, I would like to give direction to the council to reformulate the BTAC in some, either Garcetti's way or Hahn's way, and send it on to Budget and Finance, unless the chair would be comfortable in waiving it at that point. Then, when it goes to council, though, I think we should give more than just issues of formation. We should actually provide a historical perspective to the council, and assuming they support it, to the BTAC, so that it has as Mr. Parks said, much of the history, so that we're not making the same mistakes or having the same discussions.
Exactly.
And bring them up to speed as quickly as possible, so that it doesn't take a year and a half to get substantive recommendations. That
And I
would
think
be-
all of this preparatory work that your committee is doing, having this economic study, getting that going so that the contractor is in place by the time BTAC comes along.
Absolutely.
So that all of this is preparatory work done before they start the work, and puts their 18 months, assuming that you have a time frame on them, puts them in a position where they can get to work immediately.
Okay, we're going to be taking public comment now, but in 2 weeks, we'll have a further discussion on this. Leron Gubler? LeRon Gubler, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm LeRon Gubler, President and CEO of the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, and a former member of the BTAC committee, speaking in favor certainly of reforming BTAC. I think it did a lot of excellent work before, and there's a lot of new issues that have cropped up. One of those issues I want to specifically address that applies in Hollywood as well as throughout the city. One of our up-and-coming large companies in Hollywood is Legalzoom. We worked very hard to keep them in the city earlier this year when Department of Finance did an audit and was proposing to move them from the retail category to professional services. They very nearly moved out of the city. As a result of that, the city staff and the council, the mayor's office, as well as from council member Garcetti's staff, worked very hard to keep them here, and they worked out a compromise. They have temporarily extended their lease pending the creation of a new internet tax classification that was promised would be formed that would hopefully meet their needs as well as other internet companies. We've learned that this is really a very small world in the internet business category within the city. All of these companies talk to each other, and it's important that we come up with a tax classification that will be acceptable to keep them in the city. So we certainly would like to see quick action on that. While reforming BTAC is important, we would hope that the city could, and your committee could expedite action once the Department of Finance reports on the fiscal impact of creating a new category. Thank you.
Thank you. Beverly Kenworthy?
Good afternoon, Beverly Kenworthy with the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. Just to clarify, are we just speaking on item number 1, or did you want me to just roll everything into?
Yeah, I'm taking up items 1, 2, and 3 together.
Oh, terrific. Beverly Kenworthy with the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. Good afternoon. I'd like to reference one of the items mentioned in this motion, which is about retaining film production. One of the Chamber's top priorities is to retain film production and grow the multimedia industry in Los Angeles. This will be another important tool to support local jobs while other communities offer lucrative tax incentives to lure production away. We are pleased to support Councilmember Garcetti's motion to extend multimedia tax exemption to qualified businesses beyond North Hollywood Arts District. We support extending that exemption citywide to all businesses that are classified as multimedia. We support quick action on these items as we begin to work on long-term business tax reform.
Thank you. Mel Cohn?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us before you today regarding city business tax. I'm here today on behalf of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA. On discussing the first 3 items on the agenda, we concur with your discussion today of whether we're putting the cart before the horse. I think the important thing is to look at items 2 and 3 for formation of a new Business Tax Advisory Committee, BTAC. On a secondary point, the items in the first item regarding the different areas and issues, those should be covered by BTAC. In looking at items 2 and 3, I'm not going to discuss whether it's 13, 15, 9. I think the most important thing is to have qualified people, and whether it's different sized business owners, we believe there should be some tax person involved, but different people, maybe university professors, economics, because this has been covered in the past, and we agree with the 18-month time limit put on BTAC. It's very important that there be a time frame for results. The prior BTAC had a charter of 5 years, and that was stretched to 5.5, and a lot of things were moved back, and we felt it really hurt the city because we couldn't act on them. So we believe the 18-month period is valid, and it's very important. Another thing, it's important to remember, it takes time to implement certain laws. So we are in 2009, the tax year for business tax is a calendar year. So really, whatever is going to take effect, I would imagine we'd be looking at 2011. Items could be put in place during a year for new businesses, but if you look at it, it's important this 18-month or sooner happens. The other item we feel is there have been studies since 1997, and the city has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. We think it's very important that the studies be updated so they're current, which would save dollars, and also the companies, whether it's muni services.
Excuse me, before you leave, excuse me, please don't leave. I just wanted to make a comment that what Mr. Cohen was talking about was the composition. It's not so much the numerical or representation as much as what are the qualifications that are comprising this body. On the one hand, theoretically, you would think you could select the different categories and come up with some kind of composition that would create the best formula for addressing these issues. On the other hand, the way we did it the last time worked pretty good, and that was just letting 15 council members pick. I would like for the CLA to work with Mr. Garcetti and Ms. Hahn to come up with some kind of mix that is focused more on goals than on how the people are selected. But qualifications may be an important part of that. Not whichever method we use. The composition of the group is important. So we may have to review the composition before. It could have been just luck that we had the right composition or not. But I'd like us to review what made it successful and try to use that as a guide for the next composition. Excuse me, Mr. Cohen, your time is actually up, but I wanted to say that before Ms. Hahn's representative left.
Can I have 30 seconds?
How about 15?
15 seconds. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Don't worry, we're going to get plenty of time out of you.
Okay, we have vendors that did the original studies that are still doing business with the city, so please just update it. It'll be more expeditious, and also it'll meet the economic issues you have in the city. And again, it's 12 and a half seconds, but thank you, and we're looking forward, Mike, to working with this committee and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. We have Marcel Porras.
So, Marcel Porras, Council President Garcetti's office. I got a little clarification from one of my colleagues who actually sat in on some of the meetings. In preparing for the BTAC, we actually sat and met with former BTAC chair of the committee, and it was their recommendation to comprise a group that was actually smaller and that was comprised of entrepreneurs, but that were made sure to have the technical skills of those of a lawyer and accountant, but not to be weighed down by theorists, and to actually have people who were working entrepreneurs to comprise. In terms of the actual makeup of the committee, it's recommended to be a 9-body committee with appointments coming 2 from the council president, 2 from the mayor, 1 from the controller's office, 1 from the chair of budget and finance, 1 from the chair of jobs, 1 from the chair of HCD, and 1 from TCT, the Trade, Commerce, and Tourism Committee. It's a recommendation that this body should not meet for more than 18 months. It could be a shorter period, but that it was a time-sensitive matter. So.
Okay, then I think we're still going to move forward in the same direction. That was a lot of information gathered in the last 15 minutes. But it gives us a sense of where Mr. Garcetti would like to go. Clearly, that's different than Ms. Hahn. So I would like for you to sit down with her staff and try to hone in on a model that will get the most votes at City Council. Great.
Let me ask Mr. Cohen. When you were on BTAC, what was the average? About 8 or 9 members per meeting? Was it that high?
No, it was higher than that. Because the appointees from each council district and the mayor, the appointees for the Los Angeles Chamber, Central City Association, the Valley Eastern Commerce Association, I would say the average is probably around 13, 14.
And that was out of a group of about close to 20? 19. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. David Phelps?
Good afternoon. David Phelps with the Association of Independent Commercial Producers. In my previous employment, I worked for VICA during the time of the first business tax reform package, so I do have some experience on the matter and building coalitions that helped get it passed originally 4 years ago. Just wanted to keep it short. The film industry is very interested in the business tax reform effort. We played a very active role in the first wave of reforms, and we're, on behalf of the commercial producers, we're offering our assistance in working with the council and the city to reach a good second phase of reforms. We'd like to offer our assistance in serving on BTAC. My previous predecessor was a member of BTAC, Mr. Steve Kaplan, and we'd be happy to serve in that capacity again. We also want to point out that much of the talk in business tax reform has to do with the 5% across the board cut that was implemented several years ago. One of the other reforms that was implemented, and we would appreciate consideration again on, is the entertainment production cap. Either raising the minimum or lowering the cap on the level of taxes that production companies pay would help our small and medium-sized production companies prosper in the city of Los Angeles. So we would appreciate that proposal being considered again by BTAC or this committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're, I think, complete with this item. I'd like to move on to item number 4.
Mr. Chair, so for the record, items 1, 2, and 3 are continued pending report back from the CLA's office then?
Yes, at the next
Okay, great.
meeting.
Item number 4 is a motion, Alarcon Garcetti, relative to potential divestiture of all deposits in banking and other financial institutions that fail to cooperate with foreclosure prevention efforts.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Roy Morales with the CLA's office.
Is he hooked up?
I believe so. Testing, testing.
Just lift it up a little.
Testing, testing. Roy Morales with the CLA's office. Before you is the motion presented by yourself, Mr. Alarcon, seconded by Mr. Garcetti, Reyes, Council Members Hahn and Councilman Parks. This is a proposal that you asked our office and the CAO's office to explore, which is the potential to divest all of our city deposits from financial institutions that do not cooperate with foreclosure prevention efforts. And this has been an analysis that is complicated. Currently, I'm in the fact-finding portion of this. I believe we're close to completing the report. However, we came here before you to get additional clarification from yourself, from Mr. Parks, and from any public testimony on the goals behind the motion. What we have found so far is the city currently invests roughly, and it varies during the year, $400 million to $900 million in 13 financial institutions that are controlled by the city treasurer. That report is available to you. We can provide to your staff. It varies, as I mentioned. I believe the last we had was $867 million as of June 30th, 2009. Separately from that, there is the investment portfolio, which is roughly $6 billion that we have all discussed, that is also administered by the city treasurer. We have a series also of federal, state, and local foreclosure prevention programs that have been adopted or that are currently under consideration. We also have the Council District 7 pilot program to prevent foreclosures. Each of these components, each of these proposals or acts or laws set aside a series of criteria for determining what actions should be taken to reduce or eliminate foreclosures. For example, a threshold where there is a goal to reduce homeowners' mortgage payments to a particular percentage of their income. That would be in both federal and state law. There's also currently AB 7X and SB 7X, which are the state's California Foreclosure Prevention Act. And then lastly, the other components we're looking at are the current policies that are in place at both Lacers and our pensions office, pensions department, on guiding the investment of city resources into socially responsible investment options. And we have here Joya DeFore, who's our city treasurer, and Mike Perez, who is the general manager of pensions as well, who can answer detailed questions about their investments.
Okay, before we do that, we do have cards, but I do want to make it clear that divestiture is one technique versus other techniques to try and stimulate more socially responsible financial transactions that involve the city of Los Angeles. We are responsible to manage billions of dollars in taxpayer money, and I believe incumbent in the expenditure of that money is to ensure that those businesses that we fund or place our dollars in, and certainly that we invest in, should not be doing things that hurt or harm or turn a blind eye to problems in our communities that could be resolved by these institutions. On the broadest scale, there's been a lot of talk over numerous years, as long as I can remember, about community reinvestment and financial institutions' responsibilities therein. And frankly, I think the federal government has fallen short on that score. The question is, should we step in and create those standards for social responsibility amongst financial institutions, particularly given the large scale of investment that we are involved with? And I think the answer is yes. To the extent that we could have impact, we could improve conditions. Now, this isn't new to the city of Los Angeles. What is new is the notion of divestiture from banks. But in terms of us placing standards on businesses that we give taxpayer dollars to, we put standards on them all the time. We create the living wage ordinance. We create all kinds of requirements for contractors to be more socially responsible with their employees and sometimes with the people they provide services to. So this should not be taken as a new idea. The question is, to what extent can we create more responsibility for people who use our taxpayer dollars and who have the ability to change their policies and procedures in a way that could affect positive change in our neighborhoods. So the standard is not necessarily foreclosure. That's the key point I want to make. To select one item, I wanted to introduce something quickly. The notion is really broader than divestiture, and it's broader than foreclosure. The notion is, how can we create more social responsibility within those financial institutions that very recently have been under fire for the foreclosure crisis. So I actually want to give you a wider spectrum of standards to explore, not just the foreclosure issue. For example, in Pacoima, in my district, there are only 2 banks, and there's probably more than 24 check cashing places. Now, this isn't to disparage check cashing places. The people that use them need them. But it is to say that they are not getting the best value for their dollar if they're relying on check cashing places to do their banking. So, to what extent are banks investing in neighborhoods, and should we be placing large deposits in those banks that are ignoring communities that are unbanked, like in the south side of Los Angeles, in the east side of Los Angeles, and in the northeast San Fernando Valley? That could be a standard. Another standard is, to what extent are we lending to small businesses? To what extent are we lending to invest in new entrepreneurism? We know that a vast majority of businesses are micro enterprises, small businesses with 5 or less employees. 90% of them fail in the first year, but are we getting the kind of financial services to them that they need? I don't know. That could be one of the main problems. We know that with assistance, for example, from institutions like FAME or the Valley Economic Development Center, we can see a much higher success rate for those people who go through the business training programs, typically 70% success rate versus a 90% failure rate amongst those first-time businesses. So I actually want to open your mind to other kinds of standards. I would ask you to research the Community Reinvestment Act and the discussion that created the Community Reinvestment Act, because frankly, I think the Community Reinvestment Act is weak, but the discussion was very strong about ideas of things to consider. So rather than have you press forward with one standard, foreclosures, how did you perform? Well, some banks didn't even do any loans, so there is no track record. You can't measure them or not. Maybe we want them to do loans. I don't know. But so the first thing I would like to amend the motion to focus on social responsibility and divestment related to some form of social responsibility standard. Oh, by the way, green business is another, environmental concerns, it's another social responsibility standard that can be accumulated. And then secondly, I also don't want you to think that if a bank doesn't meet the standard, we'll never put our money there. I really want to see this as a scale. And I want there to be incentives for investing in those banks who meet the objectives of the scale, and some form of dealing with those banks that are not meeting our goals. And some we don't have all the standards. I could mention some there, and there are other cities that have done some interesting work in this area, so that we can borrow from them. I mentioned the green standard. There's how many loans are they giving to low-income areas? I mentioned small businesses.
I think you also mentioned local investment, I believe.
Pardon me?
Local investment as well. In other words, there's a local.
Yeah, local investment. And then in terms of the divestment, the question is, or in reverse, if we divest from certain banks and invest in other banks, is there a way we can create an incentive program to invest more in those banks that are benefiting Los Angeles beyond just holding our money? So, for example, if a bank is willing to invest, and I have another motion on this specific item, but if a bank is willing to invest in a community that has no banks, shouldn't we place deposits in that bank to get them going? Wouldn't that be helpful? And I believe that in essence, what I would like to create is a sort of community reinvestment program for the city of Los Angeles based on social responsibility factors that we formulate. I'm not trying to, the money's got to go into the banks. But the fact is that people are very upset. They believe that banking institutions could do a lot better than they've been doing. And even in the aftermath of the foreclosure crisis being well published, the response has not been appreciated by the public, particularly in light of the bailout money that the administration has given to banking institutions. The modification loan program, from my perspective, isn't the best, but even worse is the fact that they just end up making a balloon payment down the road. So it really isn't a solution long term. It's a very short term solution to hold on to the house on the theory that the value of the house is going to increase over time, and therefore the balloon payment won't be so much of a problem. Theoretically, you can get a loan after 10 years or 20 years or 30 years down the road. I wouldn't make that bet. So in any case, I wanted to express that because I don't want us to hone in on just one issue and say, well, you did lousy on the foreclosure crisis, so you can't hold our $10 million. I don't know that that's a reasonable response. I don't think that effectuates the best response in terms of social responsibility. But if we create a variety of factors that we look at, I think it gives the banks a much broader target to shoot for and improve across the board. And that's why I wanted to make sure that you understand, I'm not just talking about foreclosures per se, even though the motion specified that. So I'd like to amend the motion in committee to have the report address a broader spectrum of social responsibility factors that we would delineate, and how we would utilize those factors in terms of scoring on competitive bids and other investment of taxpayer dollars. So with that, I'd like to call up some speakers. Did you have any comment? Okay. First, we have Veronica Perez Becker.
Good afternoon, council members. Veronica Bettis Becker with the Central City Association. We understand and appreciate your concerns about social responsibility and the city's objective to limit the number of foreclosures in Los Angeles to try to reduce the impact on our city's communities. However, we have concerns about the motion before you, which proposes to divest deposits from certain banking institutions. First, we question the use of city funds to drive public policy decisions, especially in this context where we're talking about the city being the steward of taxpayer dollars and the fiduciary responsibility that the city has to the taxpayers, that their money will be, they'll get the best return, on their investment in the city, and the fiduciary responsibilities that the city has with respect to those taxpayer dollars. Second, with respect to the foreclosure issue, we ask what the problem is that we're trying to address here. All banks in California are already subject to existing and newly implemented laws and regulations at the state and the federal levels to address this issue. For instance, SB 1137 and SB 7 were both passed last year, enacting new and vigorous duties upon financial institutions to extend the foreclosure process and explore alternatives to foreclosure. Existing regulations mandate penalties for noncompliance and subject noncomlying banks to significant legal liability. We ask that you allow existing regulations to work before imposing additional requirements. And once again, just responding to what you said earlier, Council Member, we would also be concerned about the slippery slope of imposing, social responsibility requirements on banks we do business with. While I understand your concerns, we question whether this is the appropriate mechanism to do it, because it could be a slippery slope. Where does it stop? And we have to keep our fiduciary duties to the taxpayers in mind. Thank you.
I can't just let those comments slip. First of all, a government does not just have a simple fiduciary responsibility as private corporations do. They have a specific fiduciary responsibility to do what is best for their investors, and typically that means profit. Government's responsibilities go far beyond financial issues. It requires us to manage a city, and many of the things we do go far beyond the financial interests. We are looking holistically. So, for example, if we want to contract with a local company versus an outside company, even though it may be cheaper for the transaction, it may cost us more in the long run, or we may lose the benefit of creating long-term jobs in our community. That is a social decision that we make, and we make it all the time. With regard to existing federal and state laws, clearly this is a statement against what they are doing. We do not believe they've done enough. The fact that the banks are not encouraged to reduce the principal on these loans is I think a weakness in the federal rules. And notwithstanding my support of this administration, I believe it is far short of what it's going to need to be to correct our economic challenges. And frankly, if these policies of fiduciary responsibility are so good, we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place. Standing behind that mantra is exactly what got us into this problem. When financial institutions said, "Don't worry about it, the market will correct itself," it didn't. And then they came crying to the federal government asking for billions of dollars in bailout money. So no, I am not going to turn a blind eye. The last time I incorporated this, the use of a divestiture motion, or one of the last times I used it, was when the Swiss banks were refusing to negotiate with the Jewish community on reparations for all the stolen art where the profits were maintained by the banks and the properties were maintained by the banks. when the Swiss ambassador came to me and said, why are you involving government in this? This is a financial transaction. And I said, you know what? If people had that same attitude, if we didn't have that same attitude before World War II, we probably wouldn't have seen many of the occurrences that occurred in World War II. I'm not going to turn my blind eye to the social responsibility that I have as a manager of a large institution that has many financial transactions. It's just like when you go to the store. If many people choose to go to stores that are environmentally friendly, and other people will choose to go to stores that have good public relations, good people at the counter. But we, as a government, have a responsibility to choose those institutions, particularly when we're using taxpayer dollars, that are going to reinvest that money in our communities. Our banks have fallen short. And I'm not going to let this thing go. And that's why there's a resolution in the League of California Cities right now that was just reported in Sacramento to be supported by the city of Elk Grove, a small city, but people are angry. They are angry because the banks have not responded enough. 4% of modifications in all the time that they've been working on these issues is not satisfactory when we are seeing thousands and thousands of homes going to foreclosures every month in the state of California. It's not acceptable. And in my community, where we are the hardest hit community, in the northeast San Fernando, the hardest hit community for home ownership, in terms of foreclosures in the entire city of Los Angeles, unacceptable. Mr. Parks is number one in commercial foreclosures. Very close. He's in first place in terms of the numerics of foreclosures, but in second place with regard to home ownership. So we can't sit here on our hands and expect that the financial institutions are going to correct themselves when they promised they were going to do that before. Esther David? I believe that's what it says.
Good afternoon. I'm Esther Cadavid.
David, I'm sorry.
With Los Angeles Neighborhood Housing Services, and thank you for asking me to come here today. I was asked to come and present some figures in terms of what's happening with loan modifications as we've seen it with Los Angeles Neighborhood Housing Services. We've been in this foreclosure crisis for 3 years and have our databases nearing 7,000 families who have loans that have been reviewed and cases that have been reviewed. While the first 2.5 years were very difficult, I'm happy to report that over the summer we have seen an increase of 30% in loan modifications, making home affordable while not perfect, and it certainly has its challenges. We're finally starting to see some of these loan mods happen, so I'm happy to report that. We're also working with the top 10 servicers in the area and have broker contracts with them and have relationships with them so that we don't have to go through an 888 number. We have a designated rep. They're coming to our offices, they're reviewing hundreds and hundreds of files. And so that's also streamlined the whole process for us as well. Lastly, well, not lastly, but the other part of there's the people side. On the property side, the asset managers are working with us too, so they can reduce the property, the REO properties, discount them significantly so that we could put first-time home buyers in there, because we don't want the further disinvestment of neighborhoods. Whatever standard that you decide in this committee to apply with regards to the bank, we feel that we ask that it have widespread application and sustainability over the course of time. And you might be interested to know that the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, is in committee at this point, and they're trying to put more teeth on it. So I would get a hold of the congressional reps and see what the city can do with having some input and also having, your say in terms of what you want the CRA to look, because I think it'll be coming out of committee fairly soon. And the California Reinvestment Coalition can give you more information on that as well.
Thank you very much. Yvonne Maria Jimenez.
Good afternoon. I'm Yvonne Maria Jimenez. I'm the Deputy Director of Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County. I thank you for your invitation to be here this afternoon and the opportunity to provide you critical and essential information about what really is happening on the ground with families facing foreclosure and the modification offers being extended by our lending institutions. There is no argument that modifications are happening. That's not the issue. The issue is the quality and the substance of those modifications. I also want to, just for the record, reiterate that Neighborhood Legal Services is an institutional dues-paying member of 1LA, an affiliate of the Industrial Areas Foundation, and it's in our capacity as a member that Neighborhood Legal Services appears here this afternoon. I know that you're all familiar with 1LA, but just for the record, it is a broad-based organization of member institutions of nonprofits, schools, unions, and churches. We have over 85 institutions across the county of Los Angeles, and its mission is to train its members to develop leadership skills to enable them to address issues that impact families and their social and economic well-being, and work with the powers that be to bring about solutions to those issues. Today, 1LA commends Councilman Alarcon for proposing the divestiture motion. 1LA really stresses that we look at the substance and quality of modifications being offered by servicers and investors. We cannot be fooled again by the bank's unfulfilled promises and PR advertisement, alleging that they are working with thousands of families to save their homes. Again, there is no issue with the number of modifications being proposed. The issue is the quality of those modifications. And the key is not to get caught up again in the volume, but to look closely at what those modifications look like. If our goal is to ensure the well-being and health of our communities, our families, our economy, and the stabilization of our housing market here in Los Angeles, you must focus on the substantive and quality of those home modifications. That review will tell you that the modifications are short-term fixes with a high degree of possibility of redefaulting in the future. And you really need to look at it if we're to assess whether those modifications are going to achieve the goal of stabilizing our housing market. Since September of 2008, NLS has been with 1LA, has been in the forefront of these foreclosure prevention effort. Over a number of months, over 200 Northeast San Fernando Valley homeowners were put together according to their servicing loan institutions. And we negotiated with servicing financial institutions, including Countrywide B of A, JP Morgan Chase, including WAMU and EMC, Wells Fargo, including American Services Corporation of Wachovia, and IndyMac Federal Bank, now One West, to the table to negotiate loan modifications face-to-face. We also negotiated agreements with those lending institutions to provide us follow-up in order to evaluate the outcome of those meetings and those modifications. Out of that experience, 1LA has gathered extensive on-the-ground information regarding the quality and substance of the modification offers extended by those institutions. To address the lack of meaningful efforts by the banks and servicers, as you know, NLS proposed its own foreclosure prevention project, which the City Council approved earlier this year in May, and a demonstration will launch in this month using $1 million of CRA money in District 7. Utilizing the data that we have gathered, we've performed our own stress test to evaluate whether banks are living up to their claims that they're working with thousands of families to help them keep their homes. From this data, we can tell you that investors and servicers are not negotiating in good faith to achieve affordable, sustainable modifications that will provide homeowners with equity in their homes after 30 or 40 years of making mortgage payments. They continue foreclosing on homeowners despite the fact that modifications are under review. Modifications continue to be meaningless, and modifications offered continue to represent temporary fixes that will unravel in the next 3 to 4 years or 5 years. Here is what we're seeing from the cases we've got in our database. Servicers refuse to suspend foreclosure proceedings while processing modification applications. Trustee sales continue to occur while modifications are under review. Neighborhood Legal Services attorneys have had to intervene to demand the recall of notices of trustee sale and to reverse auctions of property when modifications have been under review. Borrowers continue to be offered take-it-or-leave-it deals. They take the deal or the property will be sold. Modifications being offered are not addressing long-term affordability and sustainability. Again, we will be in this same foreclosure situation in 3 to 10 years. What do these modifications look like? They're interest-only modifications for 5 to 10 years. Then the increase will be as much as $300 per month. It's what we hear in our media as payment shock. That the payments, home payments, will increase by 300% per month when you add in the principal to these mortgage loans. The modifications are temporary. They have 3 years that provide for low payments, and then they revert back to the adjustable rate mortgage loans that homeowners had to begin with. The Home Affordable Mortgage Program is not being widely adopted or uniformly implemented. HAMP modifications are still not happening in any systemic way. Borrowers have been turned down for modifications. When banks are asked whether HAMP has been considered, they indicate that no, but you can reapply for such a modification. Banks continue to reduce principal and essentially turn borrowers into renters with all the risks and responsibilities of homeowners. For an example, we have a family with a condominium worth about $180,000 currently. The modification offered by the bank includes a $310,000 balloon payment after 30 years of making mortgage payments. Modification offers have payments of over 50% of household income, while principal balances exceed current market value by $50,000 to $100,000. Borrowers with negative amortization loans and excess fees are being stuck with high principal balances without relief. Councilman Alarcon, we commend you for bringing this motion for divestiture. Banks, frankly, have done very little, if anything, to work in a meaningful way to stabilize the health of our communities, our families, and our homeowners. Today, we hear about the banks still considering these outrageous bonus payments to their banking executives. Nevertheless, again, if you were to look at the modifications, you would see that they are meaningless and that families will be back in the same situation they are in currently in 3 to 5 years. We urge you to put pressure on major lending institutions to disclose the substance and quality of the modifications being made, to analyze their true impact on the stabilization of our communities, family, and economy. We also ask that you use your positions of leadership to bring the banks to the table to negotiate meaningful modifications and to promote their participation in the demonstration project in the Northeast Valley. Again, we do feel that action needs to be taken by the council with regard to putting pressure on the banks to, one, disclose the quality of the modifications they're doing. There's no argument on the volume. That we see. It's the quality and substance of those modifications. And two, that they participate in the Foreclosure Prevention project of the Northeast Valley and to enter into meaningful modifications to stabilize our communities, our families, and our housing market here in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Sounds a lot like sharecropping, where you can work the land as long as you want, but you'll never own the
That's
land.
exactly right. That's exactly
you'll
right.
never
Overwhelmingly, that's what the modifications look like.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. Do we have a representative of the city treasurer's office? And Mike Perez from the police and fire pension? Right. We actually have the treasurer with us. So. Okay. Hoya DeFore, if you would speak to this issue. I know it gives you some trepidation. It's always easier to invest your money when you just look at the numbers in front of you, but when you have to consider social issues, it makes things much more complicated. But I'm sure that there have been discussions in amongst your colleagues across the country. So I don't think this is necessarily the first time this kind of issue has emerged in terms of trying to inspire social responsibility amongst those that we invest our dollars in. So if you could just give us your thoughts, I'd appreciate it.
I'm happy to, Councilmember Alarcon.
Could you do me a favor and speak right into the mic? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Joya DeFore, City Treasurer. With me, I have Stefan Jeskulak. I have a hard time with his name, who is our cash manager. And yes, there have been discussions. I'd like to give you a little update on what we're doing already, which I think is some good news. A few weeks ago, through the Budget and Finance Committee and then the Council, we were authorized to invest up to $5 million in a program per institution in a program called CDARS, the Certificate of Deposit Account Registry System or Service. And we have focused this program on small community banks. And we will invest up to $5 million to when that bank or that financial institution can demonstrate that those loans have been directly made for the benefit of the community, whether it be a home loan for those who do home loans. And your point earlier was well taken. Some of the businesses, financial institutions we do business with do not do home loans. And we've been very pleased. One of our shining stars is Promerica Bank with Maria Contreras Suite, who actually, I think the component missing that we've been asking the financial institutions to do is financial literacy. I think their institution does a real good job. There's the loan, but then the people taking out the loans really need to understand, that financial literacy portion. First, we're dealing at the highest level of the banks. A lot of times these programs get sort of circulated among what government relations committees or members of the bank, and not some of their higher executive officers. In Treasury, we've been actually talking to the higher executive officers. And what we've tried to do is take a carrot approach rather than the stick approach. Let's sit down, the public policy considerations that we're striving to meet. What can you do to assist us in meeting this policy? And so I know with our current depository bank, they're working on that program now. The other thing I've asked them to do is, since they have to report on their activities, not to create anything new, not to create an extra burden for the financial institutions, but provide us those reports that are already publicly available. And so we can actually, they know that it's on our radar. So if they have to do the reports, give us a copy of the reports. The challenge that we have in California is the government code, and the banks are aware of that. For instance, in California, we don't have to do RFPs for financial services, but we do. We frankly think it's a best practice. But we also insist that the banks work with us as partners and not look to the city as a paycheck. And so I think to the extent that we have educated ourselves on best practices, what the feds are requiring or should require, we don't only look, for instance, at the CRA rating. We have an instance where a financial institution that had an outstanding rating actually wanted the city to absorb a financial loss for a mistake they made. So we just use the...
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah. There was a financial institution that had an outstanding CRA rating who made a mistake, but wanted the city to absorb the financial consequences of the mistake. And that was reported to City Council probably a couple of months ago.
Could you describe very briefly the ratings of the CRA, the outstanding, there's three categories. What are those three categories?
I'll let Stefan take the technical one.
Stefan Jasperlik, Office of Treasurer. The two ratings that we track are outstanding and satisfactory.
Satisfactory. And the third is what?
Unsatisfactory.
It doesn't even show up on my legend because
we don't.
You don't work with any bank that is in that category.
We don't.
But only 15% of the banks, as I understand it, are in the outstanding category.
I couldn't tell you how many. We do at least, and I should also back up and say that we don't use that as a requirement. If a financial institution has a CRA rating, it must be satisfactory or outstanding. Some of the newer banks, the smaller community banks.
But in the satisfactory category, I believe it captures 85% of all the banks. So it really doesn't create much of an effective standard whatsoever.
Well, and that's why we only use
Also, it's tailored on a federal basis, or is it tailored regionally?
It's federal.
So the needs of Los Angeles may be very different than the rating accounts for.
And that's why we only use it as one component. What I was going to say is that some of the smaller community banks that we have injected with money don't have a CRA rating yet.
Because they're not required to.
Well, some of them want to, but some of the smaller ones, I'm not sure of the requirement, but we say if you have one, this is what it needs to be. and it takes the federal government, I don't find that their evaluation is very timely.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's only one component.
And that's what, we should create our own.
Well, what I like to do is to work with CLA on a more comprehensive program that will keep us legal, but much as we're doing in Treasury right now.
I hope you appreciated my comments. I didn't want to hang my hat just on foreclosures.
Well, I was happy to hear that.
I thought you would.
I was very happy to hear that, because I think there are some ways that we can, and the banks, they all have programs. They just need to know it's on our radar. I think as long as we talk divestiture, that would have been problematic for the city with just that option, just because we're so big, and it would cost us so much more to do business with lots of smaller banks.
Yeah, and I don't know if I made that clear, but there are other options besides divestiture. And also, I didn't intend to say, I did read the motion again, and I was a little surprised when he said all the money. What we meant by all was looking at all the deposits and divesting. It says divest all deposits, but really what I meant is to what extent do we use divestiture as a technique, as a tool. That doesn't necessarily mean if you don't meet this criteria, then we're going to divest everything from that bank. But in some cases we may. I would like to have all those options ferreted out.
And again, I'd like to continue working with the banks for the carrots. How can we work together so this is a win-win? Because
well, absolutely. This is a carrot program. It's just the way I say it. It sounds like a stick. But when you look at the other side of it, if you're divesting from one bank, you got to put it someplace. So that sounds like a carrot to me, and it depends on how you look at it.
And for instance, one of the things that has been part of Treasury's strategic plan, and why I like to use the term more community-based banking versus social responsibility. There was a joke a few years ago when I actually managed a pension fund, whose social responsibility? And so to save the city the cost of having to get additional software and screening, this social responsibility, some people will say no testing on animals, that's social responsible. So we like to term it community-based banking. What are those actions by the financial institutions that will help our community and provide an economic stimulus for our community?
Well, whatever the term we use, the point is that we're going to define the policy. And if we include all kinds of things that may be very difficult to track, and we're really not going to, I think we just create more of a mess. And we want to move this thing. It's more like driving the Titanic than it is, I shouldn't say the Titanic, driving an ocean liner than it is driving a motorboat. It's gonna hopefully move, but it'll move slowly. At the same time, we want it to have immediate impact to the extent possible. And frankly, I want the best banks to drive the other banks towards something. If we give them no reason to be best banks, then the other banks won't follow. It's sort of like when on the housing front, when we had that state controller who took the quality out of the determination of who should get the housing money, and when they did it by lottery, and instantaneously the quality of the products of the low-cost housing manufacturers dropped dramatically, and you could actually see the quality diminish. We want to drive them to the best, and I believe that those banks, if one bank has one good program, we want all the banks to capture that program, even if the bank has other programs that aren't so good. So we want to drive them all, and we want to define the criteria that gets them there, and what are the different programs that you can incur. I believe if you took all the banks and analyzed them, they pretty much will capture all the things we can do. It's just, can we get all the banks to do all the things? That's the hard part. So anyway, I appreciate your comments very much, and I absolutely want you to work with the CLA to give us other standards that we may want to look at. Call them incentives, but I also recognize that disincentives work as well, and divestiture is a very powerful word, and if you don't use it, sometimes they don't take you seriously. So that word is going to be in the report. There's no question about it. But more importantly, I think there are other options that need to be explored as well. Did you want to make any other comments? Okay. Thank you. I thought your presentation was outstanding. Okay. Mike?
Just briefly, Michael Perez, I'm General Manager of Fire and Police Pensions.
It's Perez, right? It's in my notes it says Perez. Is it with a T?
With a P-E-R-E-Z.
Yeah, just
And
like
no
Perez,
relation to
okay.
Veronica.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. My deputy's from New York. So, I don't know what that means, but...
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Perez, yeah. I thought it was.
I grew up in the inner city, in Councilman Parks' neighborhood. When I was confirmed by the city council, I was asked many times, would you commit to hiring women and minorities to work for the pension system? I mean, it's a really great question. But you know, as you're well aware, there's a fiduciary duty that we have to the fund. So my answer was always yes, if it made sense for the pension system for us to do that. Any policy that we have in an area like this is one that we've got to be very careful about the pension system. But the board actually adopted a policy called a policy addressing social, political, and human rights issues. And it calls for something as far as divestiture to be done. But the first step, if we identify a company that we think is taking actions that are hurting that company, then we can take a first step of what we call just engagement. So it's letter writing to the organization, looking at withholding proxy votes and things like that. The board adopted the policy. The key to that, though, is being able to identify companies. In this case, what banks would be identified that we can engage in that policy if the board were to agree to do this. And I think in talking with Roy Morales, that would be one of the things that I commit to doing is working with him to see if we can agree on any companies out there. I agree with the comments that Ms. Perez made, that we got to watch it. It's a slippery slope. Mm-hmm. But it's one we've engaged in before, and it's one I think that we've met with success on. So I am committed to working with Mr. Morales. He's already got a copy of our policy, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, a slippery slope. I don't know what you would call the foreclosure crisis.
I agree.
It's a landslide.
I agree with that. On the commercial side, what they're doing with some of these large organizations is because they know they can't refinance the buildings, they're just extending the terms of the loan. Mm-hmm. The size, or rather the value of the properties has dropped so much that they can't do a refi. So
yeah, exactly.
Special consideration by just extending the loan.
Yeah,
it's not being done for the average.
Yeah, what we were seeing, and I've used this metaphor a lot, but it applies here, and that is because the standards were so weak, we were creating a race to the bottom. In other words, lending without checking, just lending without verifying. Accepting false documents knowingly. Somebody, my wife who runs a small business would get calls regularly from banking institutions to verify an employee that never existed. And she even used to tell me, this thing is going to be a big problem. If her little company gets calls, once a month, then, who knows how many other companies are doing the same thing, and yet sometimes they don't call, or they'll give a fake number, and the number will be somebody who's pre-informed to give the false information. The bottom line is it was a race to the bottom, and we failed. What I want to see is a race to the top in terms of the top quality performers, banking institutions and financial institutions that are truly improving the quality of their customers' ability to perform in our economy. which is really, I think, their responsibility. They should be making sure their clients are financially literate. They should be making sure that they are getting good loans that they can afford. They should be making sure that they are investing their money wisely in a way that will return. No financial analyst that's worth their salt, in my mind, would be recommending you get yourself into one of these loans, where they modify the loan, where you're just paying the interest only for 10 years and sometimes less, but 10 years and then all of a sudden you have to come up with $100,000. I mean, that's insane. That's insane. And yet that's exactly what they're doing. That's exactly what the federal program calls for and allows. I don't think that's what was in the minds of the public when the federal government approved $35 billion or whatever that, $300 billion, whatever the figure was. I don't even remember. But I believe that the city of Los Angeles, given our portfolio, has the ability to create that race to the top, to have good community investments, if you want to put it in that terminology. So I know that the term divestiture catches attention. That's why I used it. But in terms of mapping this out in a way that actually has impact, I understand that it's probably not going to be as dramatic as the word. But I do believe that we can have positive impact, and if it's replicated by other jurisdictions, and I believe it would be, I believe we can have severe positive impact over the course of the next several years. So I appreciate your comments, and if the CLA would look at the social responsibility policies of the police and fire pension, as well as the city's pension, I believe there's a LACER's policy as well, and incorporate those. What I'd like to see at the end of the day is a menu of ways to keep score. And very similar to the Green Business Certification Program that we just announced, you don't have to meet all the criteria. You don't have to get 100% in every category. It's a compilation of scores that will differentiate those who are performing the best. So in the case of the Green Business Program, if you score, I think 10 out of 14, that's a very good score. And we would certify you. Here, those banks that would be eligible to qualify, and those that would perhaps get some kind of bonus consideration if they are exceptional, those are the ones that we want to inspire, and those are the ones that will lead the other banking institutions to do better things. That's the goal. So with that, thank you. We're going to have this come back to committee on October 13th, where we'll be considering a broad array of financial or responsibility items, and appreciate all of your comments. Thank you very much. Mr. Parks?
Roy, when we set this up, is there a reason that we didn't have LACER or DWP here?
LACER's actually had a big issue this morning. We did contact them. I don't know if representatives were able to make it. DWP, we have been in contact with. We've been focusing on the city's investment portfolios before we
get. I think one of the things that would be important is that even though I think we'd have to recommend and request, they have the same issues. I mean, when we brought all three pension systems into budget and finance, they're identical. And so I would think that even though, depending on how, when the final analysis of what gets put together, it's a matter of how it's worded to DWP Commission to say, here are some principles we'd like, we request you evaluate, and things of that nature. And so I think that would be important that all of them are here so they could hear the same thing. The other thing that I think is very, very important, particularly for the pension systems, is that we give a real legal premise as to what are their guidelines, so that no one is misinformed as to what their responsibilities are versus legally, so that everybody's clear as to where it fits into this whole issue, so that we don't have people wandering off on their own and then find out later they didn't quite understand what the legal ramifications were. And then I think the last thing I have is that for Joya, I think in unlike the pension, I'm guessing they go out and invest, or people come to them to invest in their funds. I would assume that when we deal with banks, that we have the ability on the front end to put some of this criteria in an RFP if they're trying to get our banking business, or if they're soliciting deposits, whether, so that we don't get in a point of divestiture or a punitive thing. Is there a front end thing that all of these requirements can be placed in and say, if you come to the pension system or if you come to the treasurer, these are some issues that you're going to have to address for us to consider to do business with you?
That certainly can be put in an RFP.
Yes. So those are the things I think on the front end, and again, it's a matter of how not that familiar on the pensions, whether they come to you and say, I want to borrow money. Is there, if there's not an RFP process, is there an ability to have that as part of the operating agreement, that these are considerations or these are the pension policies that we are interested in, that in order for us to make these decisions?
First of all, I think Water and Power has a policy that's very similar to the one we have. And secondly, the way that I see it in particular in this issue, dealing with the foreclosure issue, it's more a question of the investments that we made. Bank of America stock, we have tremendous holdings, as I do personally. There's been a tremendous amount of money made by the company, but there's also been tremendous losses as well. So I think there's room for us to communicate. And what we would ordinarily do is, if the board were to adopt a policy specifically in this area, what we would do is communicate with our investment advisors and let them know of the companies we want them to consider. And ultimately, the decision has to be one that they're making on behalf of the fund.
See, and I think one of the things you mentioned, Bank of America, and the fact that they purchased Countrywide, and they've got a lot of issues, but also I think we have to be cognizant of the legal side, because I think it's tomorrow we'll have an item in City Council where we're suing major banking institutions for basically a fraud upon municipalities and forcing them to go get insurance on their bond rating when they didn't need to, and there was collusion. And the first person that walked in the door and said, I give if you don't hurt me real bad, is Bank of America. I mean, so it's a matter of how not only some of these social issues, but there's a lot of these criminal things that are seeping in that we have to be equally concerned about because of how they conducted business. And as the federal government always says, the first one in the door gets the best deal. Well, Bank of America came in first and said, here's the best deal, and now they're coming to us as part of the lawsuit saying, we're first in the door, we want the best deal. And those are things that we have to be concerned with, because the other part of their business might be doing well, but there's a lot of stuff on the other side of it that's hit the criminal side. And they're probably going to be responsible. I mean, the amount of money that municipalities spent over the last decade or so on being forced to get insurance for their bonding, when their bonding was more secure and a higher rate than any of the private industry that was getting rated higher, and they were forcing us to buy insurance, just happened to be from some of their co-companies. That's going to be a major issue of them basically paying money back to municipalities. So I think we got to keep both of those in mind, if they're criminal behavior or best business practices, plus some of the other issues that we put up on the front end before they do business. We're not going to deal with you if you happen to be getting indicted in the next 20 minutes or something. That kind of stuff.
That's good. We don't want to invest in any companies that are criminals. Okay, work that into it. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Item number 5.
Item number 5 is a CAO and
We have a
mayor's reports
representative.
relative to acceptance and implementation of the 2009 program year funds for the Minority Business Opportunity Center grant.
I believe we have Linda Smith, the Center Director, to present a report.
Good afternoon. Stacy Sosa, CAO. The Mayor's Office is requesting the authority to accept $300,000 for the second year of the Minority Business Development Agency grant to accept donations for the Minority Business Opportunity Center, also known as LAMBOC, and continue resolution authority for 6 positions in the Mayor's Office. The City Council previously authorized acceptance of this grant in October 2008. This grant requires a 20% non-federal match. The Minority Business Development Agency has established a minimum total program cost of $375,000. Based on that, the city's non-federal share is $75,000. The city will exceed the required match during the 2009 program year. The primary goal of the LA MBOC program is to stimulate business development, create jobs, and enhance long-term growth and self-sufficiency of the minority business enterprise community. The CAO recommends acceptance of the second year of grant funding and continuation of resolution authority for the 6 positions in the mayor's office. These recommendations are in compliance with the city's financial policies, and that grant revenues plus budgeted city funds are available to support the cost of the program.
These are existing, okay, this is going to personnel? Okay, but these are existing authorities?
Correct. Existing positions within the mayor's office.
Okay.
They were authorized last year.
Okay. Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Hi.
Hello, how are you doing?
Did you want to report?
Yes, thank you so very much, Chairperson and Councilperson Alacon. I'd like to report, obviously, what our primary goal is to grow small businesses, particularly minority businesses, to create jobs. Our program year begins April 1 and runs through March 31. So just to give you an outcome of what we've done since April 1, we have to secure contracts and financing, because those are the 2 things that small business needs. They need contracts and they need financing. We must secure $64 million in contracts every 12 months and 38 million in financing. For the first quarter ending June 30th, we secured $8.5 million in contracts and $2 million in financing, and we have created over 88, almost 90 new jobs for the 7 businesses that we secured those financing and contracts for. We have also devoted about 2,200 hours working with over 300 clients during that time period, telling them about our services. So we feel that this program is of tremendous value within our community. We think that the mayor's office and the city of Los Angeles has supported this program since '94. But what we feel that we all need to do more in this current economic downturn, and one of the things that I'm suggesting that the mayor do is, and I'm going to be making final recommendations, that as we look to the banks to finance and support our businesses, that we, the city, need to look at what things that we can do to help grow businesses. And I propose that if the city of LA would spend 25% of its procurement dollars with local small businesses, we could have an immediate impact. And these small businesses hire people right away. They can rehire folks that they've laid off. And just so you know, our first program year, we secured $65 million in contracts. That was 28 individual transactions. And I want you to know only 3 of them were with contracts within the city of LA. We had to look to the private sector and going outside the city's procurement process in order to secure those contracts for the city. That shouldn't happen.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have any questions, Mr. Burke?
I was just, I think this is probably in process before we enacted the new rules for the council, because the reason that we asked that grants that have a general fund impact come to budget and finance is exactly what we see in here, is that in order to get a $300,000 grant per year, the city's spending $900,000. And although we say the city is subsidizing, generally subsidy is less than what the overall cost is. And so, and one of the things that we have caused ourselves to go poor on is that this grant only requires a 20% match, but we've gone so far over that with general fund that, in fact, it's probably 8 to 10 times higher than what the match is requesting. And so that's one of the things that and again, not disagreeing that the program is valuable, but it just sometimes you wonder what's the benefit of a $300,000 grant that we're spending $900,000 in funds to maintain. And it should be the other way around. We should subsidize, the general fund should be subsidizing a larger sum of money than what we're putting into it. Otherwise, the grant is subsidizing us. And it just is, and to carry that over for 3 years, we're going to be dealing with over $2 million to get $900,000.
Well, my comment on that is that the city's accounting process, every budget has indirect costs that you apply to the budget, okay? And the city has a very high cap rate, which I can't really explain why the cap rate is so high, but when that cap rate is applied to the direct costs, it more than doubles.
I understand the cap rate. The issue I'm saying is that with the number of the bodies, the direct cost, even when we look at it, it's how much in this grant? We're talking...
Direct costs?
I actually see this in reverse. We created a minority business program that is funded at $884,000, and we were eligible, I could be wrong, but we were eligible to apply for a grant. So this item before us today is specifically relative to the receipt of the grant. But the money for the $884,000 was already approved in the budget.
Yes.
So we use that as leverage to get the grant.
No, I don't disagree. I think the dilemma that we run into is that, again, we have $400,000 direct costs, about 124 fringe for the 6 positions. And again, we have a grant of $300,000. And so the issue comes up then, if it's the reverse, then we shouldn't be saying that the general fund is subsidizing it. The general fund is dedicated to positions, and we went out and enhanced those positions with a grant. But these are the kinds of upside-down grants that we've been talking about in budget and finance for a number of years, and they perpetuate themselves even after the grant runs out, because the view is that everybody thinks they're so important that we'll never get rid of it. And then you find that the grant is driving the general fund as opposed to the reverse. And I think that's my concern, that we're going to spend over 2-point-something million. And again, if we didn't have the grant coming in, would we still have this operation?
Well, that's, I don't think I'm in a position to answer that. I think that a program like this should be supported by the city, and it should be supported, by the general fund. I think that what the history of the program, since it's been in the city, it's been in the mayor's office since '94, I think that the impetus to even put the program together was because it was these federal dollars supporting this program, because this is a federal program supported out of the Department of Commerce, and that may have been the thing that got it started, and it just continues historically the same way. But as a former banker myself and a numbers person and someone that puts budgets together, and I have to admit I'm new to the city, I just don't understand how the indirect costs end up being more than the direct costs. That I don't understand the math, but that's the reality, is that there's more indirect costs applied to this budget, to this grant, than there are grant dollars coming in. And obviously they are legitimate indirect costs, that every activity has legitimate indirect costs. Why they are so high, I really can't explain, but that makes it seem upside down, because the indirect costs applied to this and the formula given to us, by the controller's office, more than doubles.
Yeah, but the indirect cost is coming from the general fund, not from the grant.
No. It obviously has to be covered by the general fund. But those, how do we come up with those costs?
Well, they're very simple. They're the cost of the fringe benefits, the city having supervision and paying for city attorneys that may have to review it. It's paying for all of the extraneous things that cause this thing to flow through the system.
Central service.
And so the issue is that we're asking the CAO to reevaluate the cap rate for internal processes, and they're going through that now. But it's the way the city gets every dime that's coming to it from outside grants, such as federal grants. You're getting every dime that's coming to the city, but we believe that that dollar figure may be excessive when you use the same cap figure for general services doing work for someone else. So they're reevaluating it. But again, it's the cap rate for outside, it's when you go back and look at it, it's as precise as you can get. I think no one disagrees that the city should retrieve all the money it can for outside grants and outside business. Where there's some disagreement is whether we should charge each other that amount when it's one department working with another.
And just so you know, when this budget is submitted to the federal agency, they will not allow us to have more indirect costs that cannot exceed 100% of direct costs. So the feds are not counting anything over 100% of the direct cost. So what they're saying is you cannot have indirect costs that exceed 100% of the direct costs. But for internal reasons, we have to do this.
Yep.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me, but, you know, I run the program, and I adhere to whatever the city budgetary.
The CAO, on page 2 of your report, on the 4th paragraph, when we say that this program is $1.1 million per year, that's including the city's contribution of 9 and the grant. Is that right?
The city's contribution of...
Well, the city's putting $900,000 per year.
Yes, that includes the indirect costs and the direct costs of the program.
But I mean, it also includes the grant. That's what brings it up to 1.1?
Exactly.
Okay, and so of that 1.1, then the breakdown is the 400,000 direct, the 124 for fringe, the 81 for various, and then the 602 for indirect costs.
Correct.
Okay, so that's the issue we've asked the CAO to look into about indirect costs of charging within the city, because this is not the cap rate. It's not my belief anyway, we shouldn't be charging the federal cap rate for internal processes. And I think that's what the CAO is looking into, because it is an exorbitant figure, and it brings money to the general fund, but it certainly cuts into the services that we're trying to buy. And so, but again, that's why we ask that in the future all grants that have a general fund impact come to budget and finance, because often the policy committees are not looking at the financial impact. They're looking at the gee whiz grant, saying, isn't it great to get one? And then we have a tremendous cost to the general fund. And we've also asked the CAO in the future, when positions are in the budget, we often will say in the analysis that there is no general fund impact, when in fact we just funded $900,000 in the budget. So it's got to have some general fund impact if we're funding $900,000 per year. So these are things we're going to try to clean up as it goes through the process. And again, that's why we altered the budget and finance requirements to put it into that system, so we can begin to look more at the financial aspect.
Just so you know, this is a 3-year grants program, and when it was presented, when we were awarded, the current 3-year funding cycle ran from 2008 to 2011. So actually, this is like the second year of that 3-year grant period, and we had to submit a 3-year budget to the federal agency. And when we came to council to accept that, once they awarded the grant, we also submitted the grant for the full 3-year period. Obviously, MBDA only gives us, we have to meet our numbers every year in order to get second and third year grant dollars. And so that's why we're here, is accepting the second year of that 3-year.
The original grant of $900,000 came to the city to support the MBOC program. So
Over a 3-year period.
Was supporting a pre-existing program. But the question that Mr. Parks is raising, I think there's one line item here kind of sticks out. $523,000 for central services.
Yeah,
I have no idea what that is.
That's
Yes, that has to do with the cap rate, and that's a figure that's calculated by the Controller's Office annually. Central services, the things that central services include are indirect costs, like, for example, your salaries today to hear this report, council and CLA. That's something that's included in central services. So it's the
So
city's...
if we have a briefer discussion, it would be less?
No.
I would have to defer to the Controller's Office on that.
It's just a rake.
So, yes, it's a rate.
It's a rake. Not rate, rake.
Oh.
No, that's what it is. It brings money into the general fund.
But it's just amazing that we allocate, I agree with Mr. Parks, there's $1.2 million here, and $523,000 goes to administrative. That's just for things like the office, the telephones.
Computers, equipment.
No, but it has fringe benefits and department administration, but all told is $727,000. I mean, the net effect is for $300,000 from the feds, we show a $1.2 million program on the books, but we're actually getting a $500,000 program.
Over a 3-year period, you're going to spend $3.3 million, and 1.8 is going free. It's the cap rate.
Yeah.
See, so that's exactly like we discussed recently with the CAO on the stimulus. We got a $2 million stimulus grant to do sidewalks, and when it all boiled down, we ended up with, I think, $500,000 that actually went into sidewalks, and the rest of it was overhead.
But if we didn't get the grant, we wouldn't have the cap money.
I know, but what I'm saying, but the issue, it boils down that your programming dollar is far less than the dollar amount that you believe you're getting. So that's why we're asking.
With all that discussion, Mr. Parks, would you introduce a motion to accept the $300,000?
Oh, no, we'll prove it. I think it's important. I
agree with you. I think it didn't make any sense to me, but
this matter is referred to the Personnel Committee, so you'll get another bite at that apple over there. But as far as this committee, we support the receipt of $300,000 in the mayor's office, as described.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Item
you.
6 is, I think these two items are receive and file items. We are going through our file, and these are two items that we believe have outlived their usefulness, and
correct.
We would ask that we receive and file both of those items. Without objection?
I just asked the clerk, when we sent item 7 to this committee back when, something like 2007, I think it was at the time an issue in which we were asking them to look at the impact on the general fund, but 18 months later, it's meaningless. And so it was a waste of work. Yeah, well, it's a waste of work.
Okay, then those two items, 6 and 7, will be received and filed. And I don't have any general public comment cards, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.